12 days before I was supposed to marry Monica Reed, I walked into a farmhouse to inspect a roof and found a photograph of my fiancée at 16 hanging over the piano. Until that moment, I had believed both of Monica's parents were living in an assisted care community somewhere near Tampa, too frail to travel and too embarrassed by their health to take part in our wedding. I had believed that because Monica had told me so, and because at 63 years old I had reached the dangerous stage of life where I mistook refusing to pry for respecting another person's privacy. My name is Robert Mercer. I had spent 38 years inspecting houses across western North Carolina, first for a construction company and later for myself, and I had learned to find problems people worked very hard to hide. Water behind fresh paint, termites behind new trim, foundation cracks covered by landscaping, roof leaks disguised by a strategically placed bucket. Somehow, I had never applied the same discipline to the woman I planned to marry. Monica was 54 when I met her at a charity auction in Asheville. She staged homes for real estate agents, had a dry sense of humor, and was one of those people who seemed to notice everyone in the room before anyone noticed her. She remembered waiters' names. She kept protein bars in her car because, as she put it, somebody was always hungry at the wrong time. When my daughter Claire had surgery on her wrist, Monica showed up with 3 freezer meals and never once asked to be praised for it. She was especially good with older people. I watched her spend 20 minutes helping a confused man find his car in a hospital parking deck. I watched her drive a retired client to a doctor's appointment because the woman's son was stuck in Atlanta. So when Monica told me that her parents, Thomas and Evelyn Reed, had become difficult and withdrawn after her father's stroke, I accepted the outline she gave me. She said they had chosen Florida because of the warmer weather and better medical care. She said their relationship had never been close. She said her mother refused to speak to her most weeks, and her father was too proud to admit he needed help. When I asked whether we should send them a wedding invitation anyway, Monica touched my hand and said, "Robert, please don't make me reopen something they worked very hard to close." I had been widowed for 7 years. My wife, Anne, had died from pancreatic cancer, and grief had taught me that there are questions people are allowed not to answer. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was proving I could love Monica without demanding access to every locked room in her life. When I proposed, I used my mother's sapphire ring, a small oval stone set in white gold that had survived 46 years on her hand and another 14 in a velvet box after she died. Claire had helped me take it to a jeweler. "Grandma would want it worn," she said. Monica cried when I gave it to her, then kissed Claire and promised she understood what the ring meant. For the next 6 months, I paid my share of wedding expenses into an account Monica managed because she was better with spreadsheets and because I was working 6 days a week. The venue was a vineyard outside Hendersonville. The guest list was 82 people. I had put just over $21,000 toward the wedding and honeymoon by the beginning of May, and Monica always seemed to know exactly which deposit was due and when. The only part of the wedding she would not discuss was her parents. Then, on a Tuesday morning in May, a realtor I had worked with for years called and asked if I could squeeze in an inspection on an old farmhouse near Mills River. The buyers were relocating from Virginia and wanted the report before the end of the week. I almost said no. Monica and I were meeting the caterer that afternoon, and I still had 3 reports unfinished. But the address was only 20 minutes away, and I had spent my entire career telling people that the inspection they rushed was usually the one they regretted. So I drove out there just after 9. The farmhouse was white clapboard with a green metal roof, a deep front porch, and 2 ancient pecan trees leaning over the gravel drive. An elderly man opened the door before I knocked. He was thin, maybe late 70s, with a cane in one hand and a hearing aid behind his left ear. A woman stood several feet behind him, holding a folder against her chest. "You're the inspector?" she asked. I told her I was. The man introduced himself as Thomas Reed. The woman was Evelyn. I remember thinking Reed was a common name. Then I stepped into the living room and saw the photograph over the piano. Monica had shown me a copy of that same picture once. 16 years old, shoulder-length brown hair, marching band jacket, one eyebrow lifted because she hated having her picture taken. I looked at the photograph, then at Thomas, then at Evelyn. My mouth went dry. Evelyn noticed. "Do you know our daughter?" she asked. I should have had a careful answer ready. I didn't. I said, "I'm supposed to marry her in 12 days. The folder slipped out of Evelyn's hands and hit the floor. For about 5 seconds, nobody moved. Thomas looked from me to his wife, as if one of us had said something in another language. Then he lowered himself into a chair and asked me to repeat what I had said. I did. Evelyn sat beside him and covered her mouth. I expected anger. I expected suspicion. What I saw instead was confusion so complete it frightened me. Thomas said, "Monica's getting married?" And that was the moment the story I had been telling myself about private family pain stopped working. I asked whether they had ever lived in Florida. Evelyn shook her head. They had owned that farmhouse for 33 years. Thomas had suffered a minor stroke 2 summers earlier, but he had recovered enough to walk with a cane, drive short distances during daylight, and manage most of his daily affairs. Evelyn had arthritis in both knees, which was why Monica had started helping with bills and paperwork. They had considered moving to a smaller house, but they had never applied to any assisted living community, in Florida or anywhere else. I wanted to believe there was some explanation that would make Monica's lie smaller. Maybe she had been embarrassed by their financial situation. Maybe she thought they would reject the wedding and wanted to spare me. Maybe she had exaggerated instead of inventing. Then Evelyn said something that made every excuse disappear. "I'm glad the renovation won't interfere with your wedding," she told me. I asked what renovation she meant. She pointed toward my inspection bag. "That's what you're here for, isn't it?" Monica said the bank required someone to inspect the house before they approved money for the roof and downstairs bathroom. I told her no bank had hired me. The buyers had. Thomas stared at me. "Buyers?" I asked if they had agreed to sell the property. He said absolutely not. Evelyn picked up the folder that had fallen and handed it to me. "We keep getting these letters," she said. "Monica tells us they're part of the loan." The first page was from a title company. I did not need to read legal language to recognize a closing notice. The property was under contract. Closing was scheduled for 9 days later, 3 days before my wedding. The signature line showed Monica Reed signing as attorney-in-fact for Thomas and Evelyn Reed under a durable power of attorney executed after Thomas's stroke. I had spent my career learning when not to pretend expertise I did not have. I told them I was not a lawyer and could not tell them whether the paperwork was valid, but I could tell them with certainty that this was not a roof grant. Their house was being sold. Evelyn's face went pale. Thomas reached for the folder with both hands. "She told us the papers were for repairs," he said. I asked whether they wanted me to stop the inspection. He did not hesitate. "Yes." I called the buyer's agent from the porch and told her there was a serious issue involving seller awareness and authority, and that I could not continue until the parties and the closing attorney sorted it out. I did not accuse Monica of anything. I didn't need to. When I returned inside, Thomas had opened a second envelope. Bank statements. Evelyn said Monica had been handling their finances because online banking confused them, and because Thomas tired easily after his stroke. They received Social Security, a union pension, and income from a small investment account. Monica paid utilities, insurance, property tax, and medical bills. At least that was what they believed. Thomas asked me to look at several withdrawals he did not recognize. I felt uncomfortable doing it until both of them told me clearly they wanted my help. Then I saw the first merchant name, Laurel Ridge Vineyard, our wedding venue. A payment of $6,500 had come from Thomas and Evelyn's account in February. I knew that amount because Monica had told me the venue required $6,500 to secure our date. I had transferred her half of it from my checking account 3 days earlier. The next statement showed $2,800 to the florist we had hired. Another payment went to our caterer. Another to a travel company that had booked our honeymoon in Maine. Evelyn kept asking the same question. Why would our money pay for Monica's wedding if we weren't even invited? I had no answer that would help her. Thomas sat so still I could hear the grandfather clock across the room. Then he told me something I needed to hear before I turned Monica into a cartoon villain in my own mind. Their family had not been happy. After Monica's younger brother died in a motorcycle accident when she was 19, Thomas had become withdrawn and angry. Evelyn admitted she had leaned too hard on Monica for emotional support. They had pushed their daughter to stay close when she wanted distance. Monica had every reason, Evelyn said, to remember those years with pain. But we never told her she couldn't leave, Thomas said. We never told her she could take this house. That distinction mattered to me. Children are allowed to protect themselves from parents who hurt them. Parents do not become saints just because they grow old. But distance is not the same thing as deception, and resentment is not ownership. Whatever Monica believed they owed her, she had hidden a house sale from two people still living in the house. She had taken their money to pay for a celebration from which she had erased them. I sat at their kitchen table for almost 2 hours while they showed me everything they had. When I finally stood to leave, Evelyn asked whether I was going to call Monica. I said, "Not yet." She looked surprised. I was surprised too. 20 years earlier, I might have driven straight to Monica's office and demanded an explanation. At 63, I had learned that the first version of a story you hear is usually the one most useful to the person telling it. I wanted documents, dates, and people who knew more than I did. Most of all, I wanted Thomas and Evelyn to decide what happened next instead of having one more person decide for them. The next morning, I drove Thomas and Evelyn to an elder law attorney named Dana Brooks in Hendersonville. I knew Dana only slightly. She had helped one of my inspection clients untangle a guardianship dispute years earlier, and the thing I remembered about her was that she asked elderly clients questions directly instead of looking at their children for answers. She did the same with Thomas and Evelyn. She asked me to wait outside for the first part of the meeting. That mattered. If they were going to challenge anything Monica had done, the decision had to be theirs, not mine. Nearly an hour later, Dana invited me back in. Thomas looked exhausted but clearer than he had the day before. Evelyn had a legal pad full of notes. Dana explained that the power of attorney did give Monica broad authority, but it did not transfer ownership of the house to her, and it did not give her permission to benefit herself at her parents' expense. Thomas and Evelyn could revoke the power if they had legal capacity. Since Thomas's stroke might be raised as an issue, Dana recommended a current capacity evaluation from his physician before anyone made a move that Monica could later challenge. By noon, Thomas's family doctor had squeezed him into a cancellation slot. The doctor documented that Thomas understood his assets, his relationships, the consequences of the proposed sale, and the decision to revoke Monica's authority. Evelyn never had a capacity question at all. By late afternoon, Dana had prepared revocations, notified the bank, contacted the closing attorney, and formally disputed the pending sale. The title company stopped the closing immediately. No dramatic sirens, no handcuffs, no crowd watching from a courthouse hallway, just a series of emails, certified notices, and signatures placed in the right hands. It was the quietest collapse I had ever witnessed, and I had spent decades watching ceilings come down after people ignored small leaks. The bank's fraud department opened a review of transactions made under Monica's authority. That was when the numbers stopped being suspicious and became devastating. Over 10 months, more than $46,000 had left Thomas and Evelyn's accounts for expenses that did not appear to benefit them. Some were wedding vendors. Some were payments toward a new-build townhome outside Asheville. The earnest money deposit on that townhome was $18,000, and the purchaser listed on the contract was Monica Reed alone. Then Dana showed me a transfer I recognized even more painfully. 3 weeks earlier, I had sent Monica $8,000 toward the final wedding balance and honeymoon. That money had never gone to the wedding. It had moved from the account Monica used for wedding funds into her personal savings, then toward the townhome. Meanwhile, her parents' money was paying vendors in our names. I had effectively paid Monica while Thomas and Evelyn paid for the wedding. Dana asked if I wanted a lawyer of my own regarding my money. I told her I probably would, but not that day. It was not noble. I was simply unable to care about my $8,000. While Evelyn sat 3 feet away, realizing that the house where she had raised 2 children had nearly been sold without her understanding she was leaving it. That afternoon, Monica sent me a text asking whether I could meet the photographer at 6. I replied that I was tied up with an inspection problem. The next morning she called twice before 9. By lunch she had called 5 times. At 2 she texted, "Did you move money out of the wedding account?" I had not. I did not answer. An hour later she wrote, "The venue says the final payment didn't clear." Then the florist called her. Then the caterer. Dana had not touched our wedding account. What had changed was Thomas and Evelyn's bank access, which meant the payment chain Monica had been relying on had disappeared. By evening, my phone showed 14 missed calls. The next day there were 23. Some were angry. Some were worried. One said, "Robert, whatever you think happened, you need to talk to me before you do something you can't undo." That line almost made me laugh, not because anything was funny, but because it was the first time I saw how completely Monica believed consequences were decisions made by other people. She still did not know I had met her parents. She only knew the money had stopped. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for Saturday evening. On Friday morning, 11 days after I had first walked into the farmhouse, Monica appeared at my office before I arrived. My assistant called me from the parking lot. "Robert," she said, "Monica's here, and I think you'd better come alone." I told her to take the morning off. Then I called Claire and told her something had happened with the wedding and that I would explain later. I did not ask her to come. I did not want witnesses. I wanted one conversation, and I wanted it to be the last one in which Monica had any uncertainty about what I knew. Monica was sitting in the chair opposite my desk when I walked in. She looked the same as she had every morning for 2 years. Neat hair, navy blouse, small gold earrings, my mother's sapphire ring on her left hand. That normality was harder to look at than anger would have been. She did not say hello. She asked, "Why is my parents' bank account locked?" I put my keys on the desk and sat down. "It isn't locked," I said. "You no longer have authority over it." Her face changed for less than a second, then settled. "What did you do?" I told her where I had been sent to inspect a house. I told her what was over the piano. I told her about the closing notice, the doctor's evaluation, Dana Brooks, the revoked power of attorney, and the halted sale. Monica listened without interrupting, but her right hand slowly closed around her left, covering the sapphire ring. When I finished, she said, "You had no business going through their finances." I said, "They asked me to look." She stood and began pacing near the window. "You don't know them," I agreed. "That's true. I've known them 11 days. She turned on me then. "Exactly. 11 days. I dealt with them for 54 years. Her voice was not loud, but I could hear the years inside it. She told me about her brother's death, about her father becoming impossible to please afterward, about her mother calling every night in tears, about losing jobs because she kept leaving work to solve their crises. Some of it matched what Thomas and Evelyn had already admitted. Some of it was new. I listened, because pain does not become false just because the person carrying it has done something wrong. Monica said, "They used me for years. When Dad had the stroke, who handled everything? Me. When the roof started leaking, who found contractors? Me. When Mom couldn't understand her insurance, who spent 6 hours on the phone? Me. Do you know what that costs?" I told her I believed it cost a lot. She looked almost relieved until I added, "But if you wanted out, you could have walked away. You could have hired help. You could have told them you were done. What you could not do was tell them they were signing repair papers while you sold their house." Monica's jaw tightened. They weren't going to lose anything. I was moving them somewhere safer. "Where?" I asked. She hesitated. "A community near Arden." I asked for the name. She didn't answer. I asked whether a deposit had been paid. Nothing. I asked whether Thomas or Evelyn had toured it. She said they would have fought her no matter what she chose. I leaned back and understood something I should have understood sooner. Monica did not think of what she had done as theft. She thought of herself as the only competent person in the family, and once she accepted that role, every decision she made for them became justified because she was the one making it. The wedding money was a reward. The townhome was compensation. The house sale was efficiency. In her mind, authority had slowly turned into entitlement. "What about my money?" I asked. "The $21,000 I put into the wedding account?" She looked at the floor. That was the first time she lost her composure. She said she had moved some funds around temporarily because the townhome opportunity had an expiration date. She planned to replace everything after the farmhouse closed. There it was. My money would be restored after her parents lost their house. Our wedding would be paid for with their money. Her townhome would be funded with mine and theirs. It was not one impulsive mistake. It was a system. Monica sat down again and said, "Robert, I can fix this." I told her she could not fix it with me. She asked whether I was really ending a 2-year relationship because of paperwork I barely understood. I said, "I'm ending it because everybody in this story thought they were agreeing to one thing while you were arranging another." She stared at me. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for without realizing it. "So, what do you want?" For months I would have said I wanted honesty, or an explanation, or some sign that the woman I loved was still somewhere inside this. Sitting across from her, I wanted only one thing. I pointed to the ring. "That belonged to my mother." Monica looked down at her hand. She did not remove it immediately. For a moment I thought she might refuse. And if she had, I was prepared to let a lawyer deal with it. Then she twisted the ring free, placed it on my desk, and said, "You'll regret making me the villain." I picked up the ring and said, "I don't need you to be a villain. I need Thomas and Evelyn to own their choices, and I need mine back too." She left without another word. I canceled the wedding that afternoon. I called the vineyard first, then the caterer, then Claire. My daughter came to my house after work and found me sitting at the kitchen table with my mother's ring in its old velvet box. I expected her to ask what happened. Instead, she sat beside me and said, "Did she give Grandma's ring back?" When I nodded, Claire closed her eyes for a second and let out a breath. Then I told her everything. The legal part lasted much longer than the engagement. That is one reason I am suspicious of stories where somebody discovers a family crime on Tuesday and watches justice arrive by Friday. Real consequences are mostly waiting rooms, statements, certified letters, phone calls that end with somebody promising to call next week, and envelopes you are afraid to open because you know another piece of your life is inside. Thomas and Evelyn kept the farmhouse. The buyer withdrew after the title dispute, and the closing attorney cooperated fully with Dana's review. The bank eventually credited back some transactions, while others became part of a civil claim. My own lawyer traced most of the money I had transferred to Monica, and after months of negotiation she agreed to repay it rather than face a separate lawsuit. Thomas and Evelyn's case was more serious. Adult Protective Services interviewed them separately. The bank produced records. The townhome contract showed where some of the money had gone. The county prosecutor reviewed the use of the power of attorney and filed charges related to exploitation of an older adult and obtaining property through misuse of fiduciary authority. Monica did not go to prison. I know some people would have wanted that ending because it feels clean, and maybe I would have wanted it too if you had asked me during those first weeks. Instead, she entered a plea the following winter that required restitution, supervised probation, financial monitoring, and prohibited her from serving as a fiduciary for another vulnerable adult during the probation period. The townhome purchase collapsed. The earnest money was partly recovered through the civil process. Thomas and Evelyn never recovered every dollar, but they recovered enough to repair the roof, replace the downstairs tub with a walk-in shower, and hire help 3 mornings a week. I did the inspection work for free, but I refused to become the person who made all their decisions. That was important to me. I gave them 3 contractor names. They chose one. I showed Thomas 2 handrail designs. He chose the uglier one because he said it felt sturdier. Evelyn picked the bathroom tile and ignored my opinion completely. Every small decision they made for themselves felt like the opposite of what had nearly happened to them. Monica wrote me once, about 4 months after the plea negotiations began. The envelope arrived at my house with my name written in the careful script I had seen on wedding invitations. I carried it around for 2 days without opening it. Finally, I put it in a desk drawer. I still have not read it. Claire asked me why. I told her that maybe Monica apologized. Maybe she blamed me. Maybe she explained her childhood in a way that would make me feel guilty, and maybe every word was true from her point of view. None of it changed what I needed to do. Closure is not always getting the final answer. Sometimes it is realizing the answer no longer controls your next decision. The harder part for me was accepting that I had loved Monica. I did not want to rewrite every good memory as manipulation because that would have been another kind of dishonesty. She had been kind to Claire. She had helped strangers. She had sat beside me on the anniversary of Anne's death without trying to make my grief about herself. Those things happened. So did the farmhouse. So did the bank statements. Human beings can be generous in one room and destructive in another. That is precisely why warning signs are difficult. The people who hurt us most effectively are rarely monsters every minute of the day. Thomas understood that better than I did. One afternoon, while I was measuring the porch for a new railing, he said, "Don't hate her for us." I told him I didn't think I hated her. He nodded and said, "Good. Hate takes maintenance." Then he grinned, because he knew he had surprised me. I asked whether he and Evelyn had forgiven Monica. He took a long time to answer. "That's not today's job," he said. "Today's job is staying in our house." I wrote that sentence on the back of an inspection card and kept it in my wallet. 10 months after the wedding that never happened, I drove to the farmhouse on a cold Saturday morning carrying a box of pastries and a replacement smoke detector. Thomas had gotten slower, but he was still walking with the cane. Evelyn's knees were better after physical therapy, and she had become annoyingly proud of the fact that she could beat me from the kitchen to the porch without holding the wall. Claire came with me that morning. She had met the Reeds several times by then, and the strange thing was that none of us talked much about Monica anymore. Thomas wanted to show Claire the new grab bars. Evelyn wanted Claire's opinion on curtains. I had spent so long thinking the climax of that year was the moment I ended my engagement that I nearly missed what actually mattered. It was not the ring landing on my desk. It was not Monica's failed payments, the canceled wedding, or even the criminal case. It was Thomas standing in his own kitchen deciding where he wanted a shelf. It was Evelyn arguing with a contractor about paint. It was two elderly people being treated as adults again. After lunch, Claire and I walked out to my truck. She had been quiet all morning, and when I asked what was wrong, she said, "Dad, what are you going to do with Grandma's ring?" I had kept it locked in my safe since the day Monica returned it. For a while, I could not even look at it without seeing the office, Monica's hand, and everything that had collapsed around us. Then one night I realized I was letting the worst thing that had happened around that ring become its entire meaning. My mother had worn it while raising 3 children, burying her husband, surviving breast cancer, and working another 11 years because she liked having somewhere to be every morning. Monica had worn it for less than a year. I went home that afternoon, opened the safe, and handed the velvet box to Claire. She looked at me and said, "I'm not engaged." I told her I knew. "Then why are you giving me this?" I said, "Because it belongs with the family until somebody decides what comes next. That decision doesn't have to be mine." Claire started crying, which made me pretend to be very interested in reorganizing the junk drawer. She kept the ring. A few weeks later, she sent me a picture of it resting in the same box beside an old photograph of my mother. That image did something for me that Monica's letter never could. It put the story back where it belonged. I had spent most of my adult life believing good judgment meant being able to spot damage before anybody else did. Houses taught me differently. A wall can look straight while the beam behind it is failing. A roof can hold through a dozen storms and then give way on a clear afternoon. The lesson is not that you should distrust every wall, every roof, or every person you love. The lesson is that when something does not make sense, love is not a reason to stop looking. If you are a father, a son, a husband, or simply the person in your family everyone expects to stay calm, you probably know how tempting it is to tell yourself that asking another question will only cause trouble. Sometimes it will. Sometimes that question changes a wedding, a bank account, a home, or the way you see someone you thought you knew. But there are worse things than discovering an uncomfortable truth before you are ready. One of them is discovering it after somebody else has lost the right to choose for themselves. I never married Monica. I never read the letter. Thomas and Evelyn stayed in their farmhouse. My mother's ring went to my daughter, where it no longer reminded me of what I nearly lost. And if there is one thing I carried away from all of it, it is this. Family is not proved by who gets invited to the wedding, whose name appears on a deed, or who has the legal authority to sign a paper. It is proved in the moment. Somebody weaker than you says, "This is what I want," and you decide whether you are going to listen.